Sarah Mitchell had always been the cautious one in her group of friends. At 28, she worked as a nurse in Denver and spent her weekends hiking the Colorado mountains. When her college friends Jake, Emma, and Marcus invited her on what they called an easy climb up Mount Elbert, she almost said no. The weather forecast showed possible afternoon storms, and something in her gut told her to stay home. But Jake had been persistent. He was an experienced climber who had tackled several 14,000-foot peaks. And Emma was training for a mountain climbing expedition in Nepal. Marcus, though less experienced, was eager to prove himself after his recent promotion at his law firm. They assured Sarah it would be a straightforward day hike. Nothing like the technical climbs she always worried about. The group met at the trailhead before sunrise on a crisp October morning. The aspen trees were turning golden, creating a stunning backdrop against the rocky peaks. Sarah packed her day pack carefully, checking her water, emergency whistle, first aid kit, and extra layers. She noticed that Jake had brought minimal gear, claiming he knew the mountain like the back of his hand. The first few miles went smoothly. They chatted about work, relationships, and their upcoming college reunion. Emma shared stories from her climbing training, while Marcus took frequent photos with his expensive camera. The trail was well marked, and other hikers passed them heading up and down the mountain. As they gained elevation, the temperature dropped, and clouds began forming around the peaks. Sarah mentioned the weather change, but Jake dismissed her concerns. He pointed to his GPS watch and announced they were making good time. The summit was only 2 miles away, and he insisted they could beat any incoming weather. Around noon, they reached the tree line. The landscape transformed into rocky terrain, with loose stones and steep sections that required careful footing. Sarah began feeling the effects of the altitude more than the others. Her breathing became labored, and a mild headache started forming behind her eyes. She had always been sensitive to elevation changes, even though she lived in Colorado. Emma noticed Sarah struggling and suggested they take more frequent breaks. But Jake was focused on reaching the summit before the weather deteriorated. He kept checking his watch and urging the group to move faster. The clouds were thickening, and the wind was picking up significantly. Halfway through the rocky section, disaster struck without warning. Sarah stepped on what appeared to be a stable rock, but it shifted under her weight. She lost her balance and tumbled down a steep slope, hitting several boulders before coming to rest against a large pine tree about 40 feet below the trail. The fall happened so quickly that her friends barely had time to react. When they scrambled to the edge and looked down, they saw Sarah lying motionless beside the tree. Blood was visible on her forehead, and her left leg was bent at an unnatural angle. She was unconscious and unresponsive to their shouts. Jake immediately pulled out his phone, but there was no cell service at their location. The nearest ranger station was miles away, and storm clouds were moving in rapidly. Emma wanted to climb down to reach Sarah, but the slope was too steep and unstable. Marcus suggested they hike back to find help, but that would take hours. The wind grew stronger, and the first snowflakes began falling. The temperature was dropping quickly, and they could see their breath in the thin mountain air. Sarah was wearing only a light jacket and hiking pants, completely inadequate for overnight exposure at that elevation. Jake made a decision that would haunt him forever. Looking at the deteriorating weather and the dangerous terrain, he convinced Emma and Marcus that they needed to hike out immediately to get professional rescue help. He argued that staying would put all 4 lives at risk, and that rangers would be better equipped to handle a technical rescue. Emma protested, insisting that someone should stay with Sarah. She pulled out her emergency space blanket and wanted to find a way to get it down to her injured friend. But Jake pointed to the darkening sky and emphasized that they would all freeze if they didn't start hiking out immediately. Marcus, who had little mountain experience, trusted Jake's judgment completely. The lawyer was already shivering in the cold wind and worried about becoming another casualty. He supported Jake's plan to leave Sarah and get professional help as quickly as possible. With heavy hearts and growing panic, the 3 friends marked their location with bright orange survey tape and began hiking rapidly down the mountain. They promised each other they would return with rangers and rescue equipment. Emma left her space blanket tied to a tree branch, hoping someone would see it and investigate. As they descended through the increasing snow, none of them looked back at the spot where their friend lay unconscious and alone. The storm was intensifying, and their focus shifted to their own survival and reaching help before conditions became impossible. Behind them, Sarah remained motionless beside the pine tree, her body temperature already beginning to drop as the first mountain blizzard of the season moved across the peaks. The snow began accumulating around her still form, and the wind howled through the rocky landscape with increasing fury. What her friends didn't know was that Sarah had briefly regained consciousness just minutes after her fall. She had tried to call out, but the wind carried away her weak voice. Her head injury was causing confusion, and her broken leg made any movement excruciating. She had managed to open her eyes and see her friends at the edge above, but they were already turning away to leave. The realization that she was being abandoned hit her harder than the physical pain from her injuries. Sarah understood their reasoning, but the terror of facing a mountain storm alone and injured was overwhelming. She used what little strength she had to crawl closer to the tree trunk for minimal shelter, knowing that her survival now depended entirely on her own will to live and the hope that rescue would come before hypothermia claimed her life. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness as the storm intensified around her. The snow was falling heavily now, accumulating on her body and creating a thin, white blanket that actually provided some insulation. Her head injury caused waves of nausea and disorientation, but the cold was becoming a more immediate threat than her confusion. She had fallen into a natural depression beside the large pine tree, which offered minimal protection from the wind. Using her uninjured arm, she managed to pull pine needles and small branches around her body, creating a makeshift shelter. Every movement sent shooting pain through her broken leg, but she knew that staying warm was her only chance of survival. Meanwhile, Jake, Emma, and Marcus were struggling through the blizzard on their descent. What should have been a 3-hour hike down was turning into a nightmare of whiteout conditions and disorientation. Jake's confidence in his navigation skills was being tested as familiar landmarks disappeared under the swirling snow. Emma couldn't stop thinking about Sarah lying alone on the mountain. She argued repeatedly with Jake about their decision, insisting they should have found a way to stay with their friend. The guilt was eating away at her as she imagined Sarah waking up to find herself abandoned. Marcus tried to mediate, but he was struggling with his own fears about making it down safely. The three friends became separated in the storm when Marcus stopped to adjust his pack and couldn't see the others through the heavy snowfall. Jake and Emma didn't realize he was missing until they had hiked another quarter-mile. By then, the visibility was so poor that going back to search seemed impossible. They made the agonizing decision to continue down, hoping Marcus would follow their tracks. Back on the mountain, Sarah forced herself to stay awake by focusing on her breathing and moving her fingers and toes to maintain circulation. She had taken wilderness first aid courses and knew the signs of hypothermia. Her body was beginning the process of shutting down blood flow to her extremities to protect her vital organs, and she could feel drowsiness trying to overcome her. To fight the urge to sleep, Sarah began talking to herself, recounting memories from her childhood and her career as a nurse. She thought about her patients who had fought against incredible odds to survive, and she drew strength from their courage. The pain from her injuries actually helped keep her alert, serving as a constant reminder that she was still alive and fighting. As night fell, the temperature plummeted to well below freezing. Sarah's makeshift shelter was covered with several inches of snow, creating an igloo-like environment that trapped some of her body heat. She could hear the wind howling overhead, but the sound seemed muffled by the snow accumulation. Her water bottle had frozen solid, but Sarah managed to eat small handfuls of snow to stay hydrated. She knew that eating snow would lower her core body temperature, but dehydration would be equally dangerous. She rationed the energy bars in her pack, eating small pieces every hour to maintain her blood sugar levels. At the ranger station, Jake and Emma finally arrived around midnight, exhausted and hypothermic themselves. The duty ranger, Tom Rodriguez, immediately recognized the severity of the situation. He had 20 years of mountain rescue experience and had seen too many cases where injured hikers were left exposed to harsh weather conditions. Rodriguez quickly assembled a rescue team, but the blizzard conditions made immediate deployment impossible. Even experienced rangers couldn't navigate the technical terrain safely in whiteout conditions with high winds. The earliest they could attempt a rescue would be at first light, assuming the storm passed. Emma provided detailed information about Sarah's condition and their exact location, while Jake submitted his GPS coordinates from the accident site. The rangers studied topographical maps and identified the most feasible approach routes for a technical rescue operation. They prepared specialized equipment, including medical supplies, warming devices, and gear for a difficult extraction. Marcus never made it to the ranger station that night. He had become completely lost in the storm and was forced to take shelter under a rock overhang about 2 miles from where Sarah lay injured. He spent the night huddled in his emergency bivy sack, terrified and alone, listening to the wind and wondering if any of them would survive. As dawn approached, Sarah was barely conscious. Her core body temperature had dropped significantly, and she was showing advanced signs of hypothermia. Her speech was slurred when she tried talking to herself, and her movements had become clumsy and uncoordinated. The snow around her shelter had created a small cave, which had probably saved her life by trapping warm air. The storm began to clear just before sunrise, revealing a landscape transformed by nearly 2 feet of fresh snow. Visibility improved dramatically as the clouds lifted, and the rescue team prepared for immediate deployment. Rodriguez divided his team into 2 groups. One would approach from the main trail, while another would take a more direct, but technically challenging route from the west. Sarah heard the sound of helicopters in the distance as the sun came up. Search and rescue operations were beginning, but she was too weak to signal for help. Her emergency whistle was buried somewhere in the snow around her makeshift shelter, and she barely had enough energy to keep her eyes open. The rescue team faced numerous challenges as they ascended through the fresh snow. The trail was completely obscured, and avalanche danger had increased significantly due to the new accumulation. Each step had to be carefully planned to avoid triggering slides or creating additional hazards for team members. Rodriguez led the technical team using climbing ropes and specialized snow equipment. They moved methodically up the mountain, checking their GPS coordinates against Jake's recorded location. The ranger's experience told him they were racing against time, as prolonged exposure to severe cold was often fatal even for young, healthy individuals. At the accident site, Emma's orange survey tape was barely visible under the snow accumulation. The rescue team spent precious minutes locating the exact spot where Sarah had fallen. When they finally spotted movement near the base of the pine tree, Rodriguez felt a surge of hope, mixed with concern about what they would find. The technical rescue required 3 team members to rappel down the steep slope, while others managed ropes from above. As they approached Sarah's position, they could see she was still alive, but showing severe signs of hypothermia and exposure. Her lips were blue, her speech was incoherent, and she was shivering uncontrollably. Rodriguez's team immediately began warming procedures while assessing her injuries. They wrapped her in emergency blankets and activated chemical heat packs to raise her core temperature gradually. The broken leg would require careful stabilization before they could attempt to move her up the rocky slope. The extraction process took nearly 3 hours as team members carefully secured Sarah in a rescue litter and used rope systems to raise her to the main trail. Throughout the operation, she drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling about her friends and asking if they were safe. Once on stable ground, the rescue team called for helicopter evacuation to transport Sarah to the nearest trauma center. As they waited for the aircraft, Rodriguez couldn't help but think about how close they had come to finding a body instead of a survivor. Sarah's knowledge of wilderness survival and her determination to stay alive had made the difference between life and death. The helicopter ride to Denver General Hospital was a blur for Sarah. She remained conscious enough to hear the medical crew discussing her condition over the aircraft's noise. Severe hypothermia, possible traumatic brain injury, compound fracture of the left tibia, multiple contusions, and early signs of frostbite on her fingers and toes. The numbers and medical terminology washed over her as she focused on the simple fact that she was alive. At the hospital, Sarah's parents arrived within hours of notification. Her mother, Linda, was a retired teacher who had always worried about her daughter's hiking adventures. Her father, Robert, was a former military medic who understood survival situations better than most. When they saw Sarah in the intensive care unit, connected to warming blankets and monitoring equipment, both parents struggled to contain their emotions. The attending physician, Dr. Jennifer Walsh, explained that Sarah had survived conditions that killed many experienced mountaineers. Her core body temperature had dropped to dangerous levels, but her youth, physical fitness, and wilderness training had helped her body maintain basic functions. The head injury was concerning but appeared to be a concussion rather than something more serious. Jake, Emma, and Marcus arrived at the hospital separately, each carrying the weight of guilt about their decision to leave Sarah on the mountain. Jake had spent the previous day being questioned by rangers about the accident and rescue operation. His confident demeanor from the mountain had been replaced by hollow-eyed exhaustion and self-doubt. Emma had barely slept since reaching safety. She kept replaying the moment when they decided to leave Sarah, wondering what would have happened if she had insisted on staying. The space blanket she had left tied to a tree branch had been found by rangers, but it hadn't reached Sarah's location. Emma couldn't shake the image of her friend lying alone in the snow while they hiked away. Marcus had been found by a separate rescue team after spending the night lost on the mountain. His experience had given him a harsh education in mountain survival and the consequences of poor preparation. The successful lawyer who had been eager to prove himself on the peaks now understood how quickly confidence could turn to terror in the wilderness. When Sarah was stable enough for visitors, she faced her friends for the first time since the accident. The hospital room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitoring equipment. Jake stood near the window, unable to make eye contact. Emma sat in the chair closest to the bed, tears streaming down her face. Marcus remained by the door, as if ready to flee at any moment. Sarah's voice was hoarse when she finally spoke. She didn't express anger or blame, which somehow made the situation more difficult for her friends. Instead, she asked about their own safety during the storm, and whether they had been injured during their descent. Her concern for their welfare despite her own trauma highlighted the contrast between her character and their abandonment of her. The conversation that followed was painful and honest. Jake admitted that his decision to leave had been driven more by fear than rational assessment of the situation. He had panicked when the weather deteriorated and convinced himself that hiking out was the only option. His mountain experience had made him overconfident in his judgment, but the reality of leading a group in emergency conditions had overwhelmed him. Emma revealed that she had wanted to stay with Sarah, but had been swayed by Jake's insistence and Marcus's obvious fear. She felt that she had betrayed her friendship by not fighting harder to remain at the accident site. The guilt was affecting her work and personal relationships, making it difficult for her to function normally. Marcus was brutally honest about his own cowardice. He acknowledged that his lack of mountain experience had made him a liability, but he also admitted that fear for his own safety had influenced his support for leaving Sarah. The lawyer, who was accustomed to controlling situations, had felt completely helpless on the mountain. Sarah listened to each confession without interrupting. When they finished speaking, she told them about her night on the mountain. She described the terror of waking up alone, the physical pain of her injuries, and the mental battle against hypothermia and despair. But she also talked about the determination that kept her alive and the hope that rescue would eventually come. The healing process extended far beyond Sarah's physical recovery. Her broken leg required surgery and months of physical therapy. The head injury caused persistent headaches and occasional memory problems that gradually improved over time. But the emotional impact of the experience affected all four friends in different ways. Sarah's perspective on friendship and trust had changed fundamentally. She realized that extreme situations revealed people's true character in ways that normal life never could. While she eventually forgave her friends, their relationships would never return to the casual intimacy they had enjoyed before the mountain accident. Jake struggled with the knowledge that his leadership had nearly resulted in Sarah's death. He sought counseling to deal with the guilt and anxiety that followed the rescue. His confidence in mountain activities was shattered, and he took a break from climbing to reevaluate his approach to outdoor adventures and group dynamics. Emma channeled her guilt into positive action by becoming a volunteer with mountain rescue organizations. She completed advanced wilderness first aid training and learned technical rescue skills. Her climbing expedition to Nepal was postponed while she focused on developing expertise that could help prevent similar situations in the future. Marcus made the most dramatic life changes following the mountain experience. He left his law practice and enrolled in emergency medical technician training. The man who had been focused on professional success and personal achievement discovered a calling in emergency services. He eventually joined a mountain rescue team, dedicating his weekends to helping other hikers in distress. The rangers who had conducted Sarah's rescue used the incident as a training case for future operations. Tom Rodriguez emphasized the importance of wilderness survival skills and the dangers of abandoning injured party members. The rescue had succeeded because of Sarah's knowledge and determination, but also because of favorable weather conditions during the extraction. Sarah returned to nursing with a deeper appreciation for trauma recovery and patient resilience. Her experience as a patient gave her insights into the fear and vulnerability that injured people experience. She specialized in emergency medicine and often shared her story with other healthcare providers to illustrate the importance of hope and determination in recovery. The mountain accident became a defining moment that changed 4 lives permanently. Sarah's survival had required physical endurance, mental toughness, and wilderness skills, but it had also depended on the quick response of experienced rescue professionals. Her friend's decision to abandon her had nearly proved fatal, but it had also led to personal growth and renewed purpose for each of them. Years later, the 4 friends would occasionally meet for coffee or dinner, but their relationship remained forever marked by that October storm on Mount Elbert. They had learned that friendship could survive betrayal and that forgiveness was possible even after life-threatening abandonment. But they had also discovered that some experiences create permanent changes in how people see themselves and others. Sarah continued hiking and climbing, but never again with the same group. She joined organized hiking clubs where safety protocols were strictly followed and where the culture emphasized collective responsibility for all group members. Her experience had taught her that the mountains demanded respect, preparation, and unwavering commitment to the welfare of every person in a climbing party. The story of Sarah's survival spread within the Colorado hiking community, serving as both inspiration and warning. Her determination to stay alive in desperate conditions became legendary among local climbers, while the decision to abandon her was studied as an example of how group dynamics could lead to tragic choices. The mountain itself remained unchanged, indifferent to human drama, and continuing to challenge climbers with its weather, terrain, and altitude. But for 4 people who had experienced its power firsthand, Mount Elbert would forever represent the moment when their friendship was tested by extreme circumstances and when they discovered what they were truly capable of when faced with life or death decisions.